welcome to Fandom in the Age of the Mediaverse, the first of a group of Mediaverse Lounge shows that we'll be putting on, as this one especially for the VR AR Global Summit. We have a really good group of guests today from different parts of the entertainment world who have been dealing with fans and media for many years. Brett Leonard, Mr. Lobo, and Stephen Deinhardt. I'm Larry Rosenthal, WebXR, and I'm going to let each panelist give you a little description of who they are for a minute or two, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Hey, Larry Rosenthal, our moderator.
All right. Hi there. Welcome to WebXR presenting the first of the Mediaverse talk shows about welcome to the future of fandom and XR. This is a special panel that we've put together for the VR AR Global Summit, and we thought that we'd do it within the medium that we've all been talking about, which is XR versus talking Zoom heads. And so as we begin to build out the Mediaverse as a fandom-based project, we started to put together, this is the beginning of this lounge, and we've got a studio audience live, and we've brought together an interesting panel of experts who are all basically using, who have been in the world of fandom and creative content for decades, and now are using XR and VR and AR as this new medium to communicate and to work with fans and to make new types of content. So we have a great panel here. I'm going to let each one take about a minute to introduce themselves from and what they do. So why don't we just start taking away first with Stephen Deinhardt, the narrative designer. Why don't you give us a minute about who you are and what you do?
All right, thanks, Larry. It's great to be here. Yeah, this is way more refreshing than your typical Zoom call. I think we're all have so much of that these days. So I have been working in entertainment for, I don't know, I guess about 20 years. You know, got my start mostly doing multimedia stuff and what we call rich media, decades ago. And eventually started working in AAA games. Over the past, I would say 5 or 6 years, I've moved into creating mixed reality experiences for festivals and for major theme parks. And I'm currently working on my own project, which you see some of the art around the room you so gracefully put here, thank you, called Giant Lands. I'm working with some of my boyhood idols from TSR to create a new property in a science fiction, should I say science fantasy setting.
Very cool. Great, very cool. I mean, exciting stuff, and we'll get into it in depth as we speak. We have with us also Mr. Lobo from OSI 74 and Cinema Insomnia. We've known each other going almost 20 years now, and so I'll let Mr. Lobo tell you a little bit about himself.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Larry, for having me to this event. I grew up in the Northern California watching Creature Features, which is hosted horror films. I ended up doing that kind of show myself for ABC TV originally, starting in 2001, hosting the late night movie. Then we went into syndication. We had one of our bigger stations was in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I met Larry. We started doing screenings in a virtual drive-in in Second Life with Cinema Insomnia really early, like 15 years ago.
Right.
And it was an interesting way to kind of build a community there. I've been in a lot of horror movies. I've worked on a lot of documentaries and horror films. I've worked with a lot of channels, cable channels, media networks, and streaming has kind of been the new frontier. I've been working, I worked with a horror channel called Zombie TV for 2.5 years. And now we have our own channel, OSI 74, which is a creative collective. We have 900 pieces of content on the channel right now and work with dozens of producers. Most of the content on there is either retro or has an element of imagination or humor, or is just weird. Most of it's weird.
They're not bad.
Yes. But yes, my catchphrase for my show, Cinema Insomnia, is that they're not bad movies, just misunderstood. So hold on, not quite. Let me one more second. Basically, this is our 20th anniversary of Cinema Insomnia coming up, so we're still doing it, and we're hoping to kind of take this into the new media. All right, thank you, Larry. That was my intro.
Cool. Brett Leonard, one of us OG VR guys. Take it away.
Well, I mean, I've been a film director for about 30 years, and I've been lucky enough to make some hit movies. One of which was The Lawnmower Man, which introduced the idea of virtual reality and the term to popular culture. Anyway, Jaron Lanier introduced it to me, and I cast Pierce Brosnan to play the Jaron Lanier character. So, if you know Jaron, you know
typecasting.
Anyway, but just because I just heard Mr. Lobo's background, I mean, I am very similar in my background, except that I started in Toledo, Ohio, watching creature features. I, started in horror. My first horror film, The Dead Pit, was picked up by Joe Bob Briggs, the Grapevine movie critic from Grapevine, Texas, and he called it the only zombie art film ever made, and that started my career. So and it's one of my favorite films, by the way. I'd love to get it to you, Mr. Lobo. I don't know if you checked it out.
I have a copy of it, and my copy has glowing eyes on the box.
Exactly. It was the first interactive, three-dimensionally molded video box for VHS
cover. Yep.
And because of that, I mean, it was a very, very low budget movie. But because of that, it's sold all over the world and really, catapulted me then into Lawnmower Man. So I'm basically, a horror kid from the, and that's where I come from. Lawnmower Man was sci-fi horror, and then I, have branched out into all the other genres. I've been lucky enough to have like about $500,000 of box office. I'm sorry, $500 million box office, and it's a lot of projects to talk about. I won't go into all of that, but it's being here in this virtual space in an interface similar to what I was showing in my movie almost 30 years ago is definitely fucking trippy.
Well, yes, I mean, again, a little bit about the history with WebXR. Again. I said to Brett when I met him, since you were doing fiction, I was doing faction all these years, for 30 years, the early 90s. And, I was doing what, as Mr. Lobo mentioned, 15 years ago, we were doing similar things, very similar things. With Second Life, going back another 10 years earlier, we were doing very similar things with VRML, which was the first virtual model, virtual reality for the web. Precisely what we're doing here as well, and worked on things with Snow Crash and DC Comics, and that kind of is kind of why we're here today. In a sense, is that it's taken, it's evolved over 20 years, and it's interesting how it's evolved, even where from film and video and independence and fandoms get created around properties, that now we have this new medium dumped on our lap. Again, it's one that I've been playing with. I know Steve, as well, been playing with it and Brett to a degree as well for some years. But now it allows us to do what we're doing here, be close to the fans, bring them in, collaborate. C3 was always about collaboration, commerce, and creation.
And, I was a storyteller watching all that, being inspired by all that, and then, kind of popularizing it through the Hollywood lens. So it's, there's a history to this that a lot of people that are new in VR or gotten into VR in this new generation don't even know about. And I think that that's something really interesting to explore.
I agree. I mean, I think that for years they fed off of each other, fiction and faction, and to Ready Player One, which again, most people would look at today as, that combination of fiction and faction. And of course, it generated the world of what's happening today with Facebook, VR, and Oculus, and, and of course, this global summit. So let me ask a question of. So I'll ask to each one of you, and then we can just bat around some general ideas. So Brett, again, so much time. What have you seen happening recently now that's kind of exciting that that brings together what some of the new projects that you're working on, where you can do film and XR at the same time?
But really, the thing that's been, to kind of jump to the most exciting thing, which is what we're doing right here, this idea of virtual experience that can be ubiquitous and shared as a link in the browser, and having a foundational algorithmic foundation to, supporting that, like this Hubs does, and the overall WebXR area. That's incredibly exciting to me, because the friction points for virtual experience, what I call VR, VX, virtual experience writ large, is any way you deliver it, they've got to be taken away in order for this to become a truly democratized medium, a truly, which I think is one of the most important things. And this platform we're on right now is an example of that. Yes, there are tons of issues, and there is the lack of an onboarding ritual like we've had for every other medium, in the history of mankind, or humankind, I should say. And that aspect is something that needs to be focused on. So in our project with Studio Lightship, we're very much trying to connect, traditional storytelling and new interactive storytelling with media, traditional media like a feature film or a television series that then has extensions very organically in what we call utilize the world building process, so that all those assets, those world assets, are being utilized across an ecosystem of different traditional media and immersive media expressions. And
right.
And that's really the connection of all these things. And the one other thing I'll just mention in this particular answer is just and social engagement being at the center, which is why those of you that have been working with Second Life and doing all these all of that experience and that interaction, the human interaction, is the thing we need to be focused on even more than ever. And especially now that we have ubiquity with things like WebXR, like we're in right now.
So Stephen, you're going to say something. Go, continue, please.
Yeah. Obviously, St. Merle's here have crossed over into sort of, I'll say, industry pockets at times, and I'm going to drop a T word right now. You guys won't even say it, but transmedia storytelling, right?
Yes.
Exactly. We're good with transmedia in this world.
I love transmedia as a word.
And no, I think it's a great word, and I see it sort of coming back into use. I think it was sort of misused for a little while there. And then, I really love what you're talking, which is, a dream of mine for ages, and I still kind of do it with my independent projects, of creating a pipeline that you can use across mediums and reuse assets so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time you're trying to take your new experience to a different medium. So, do you really feel like we're there, Brett?
Yes, absolutely. We're utilizing the process. Matter of fact, we actually have a patent group that's working to create licensable process IP and hardware and software around this. It's being headed up by a man named Dominic Sinotti, who has done a tremendous amount of things in all kinds of areas of patents and invention. There's this moment that we're in right now is something that comes along once every 100 years or so in the emerging medium. And one of the things that never has happened in the entertainment business and production process much is the idea of patenting things and creating a model around them. Only a few things have done that. Panavision, Technicolor, there's Dolby. These are the things that have created processes and things that are codified in a way, and that's what we need. We need standards and codification in world building process writ large, and that's a very, very big, multidisciplinary chunk of flexing tech stack, as you all know.
Right.
But that's what's fascinating to me is the granular nature. What are the best pieces at any given moment, and to kind of rise in the surface tension of that overall rising of the technological enablements. And with certain things being like ubiquity, like the idea of being able to share a link and having less technical friction in a virtual experience being very, very critical and key to this being something that's really, taken on by the mass participants of the world. I think it's very important that happens.
I myself, if I can jump on that. So,
Yes.
I got involved in the patent wars myself. I love patents. I never realized I liked patents so much. So much of my career has been dealing with virtual. So as soon as I started really working in mixed reality and taking the digital elements and bringing over to the virtual, suddenly these things become patentable in a way that my previous stuff was not. So to me, I love that. I get excited about that. And creating patents for technologies that are on the brink, but it seems to be really contradictory to me. We see some of it coming out of this whole Apple Epic dispute, whereas there's this sort of like, I don't know, I'll call it socialism. I don't have any problems with socialism itself. It's not a dirty word. But it seems like, in the context of patents and all this stuff, we're trying to create this open system. And it comes back into some of the stuff we talked about in previous sort of iterations of this, where we have fans making content that are feeding back into our properties, right? So
that's the key. Ironically, again, I went with patents and things to lawyers 30 years ago about this. Nobody would patent this kind of stuff. So I don't even want to, And but the truth is that so many of the patents too that get done in this technology, there's so much prior art, and the patent system's quite broken. It's just getting paid by corporations. But the point that we're using this medium right now, Mozilla Hubs versus not Horizons or something else at that moment, tells me that we're in a very different stage. We are. So, and what's interesting, of course, is that Starbase C3, which is what I created again around this technology. It was created with this model of creating a world of Lego parts of an entire science fiction universe. That would be able to be inhabited by fans who would contribute. And the key is that they would be able to put things together and then resell them fairly. Because fans spend all their time today. This panel's about fandom. A lot of fans spend all their time making artwork and living in the universes that us creators make for them. And the question is it equitable to a lot of them? There's entertainment, and then there's life, and then there's economy, business, and they're all merging again with this medium around us. So, Mr. Lobo, again, you've been, nothing more than a Comic-Con fan-based, vehicle operator for many years. So what do you see? As close as anybody what it means to keep, that together, that kind of community.
I think anyone who is doing any sort of, anyone who's doing anything right now has to kind of spend some time in the trenches with the fans. That's what conventions and things are all about. And certainly, in a place where people don't have to pay for anything if they don't want to, you have to kind of win them over to where they don't want to steal your video. They want to buy it from you, and maybe they might want to get it autographed, Right. So, you definitely have to be good to the fans. You have to kind of build a community of fans. And, in what I do, it's even more critical because a horror host or a movie host is a companion. And so for a lot of those people, I'm sort of their connection to their next favorite misunderstood movie, right. or maybe I'm just a friend for them on a Saturday night, for 2 hours.
We had a conversation a day or two ago saying that, today the product isn't as much about the movie, the Marvel movie, AAA movie or game. It's the community and the build up around it. In the market, in the press, but really that community, that social, and of course, and that's where, again, this technology, the XR stuff, offers another level to the so-called the podcast.
The things, to put it even simpler, the things that you like define your lifestyle.
Correct, it's lifestyle.
So the more that you promote what you do as a lifestyle, the more likely people will, use your mode to help define themselves. I've got this thing up on my shelf, and it kind of represents me. You know, like I always get scared when I come into somebody's house and they've got nothing on their shelves. They don't have any books. They don't have any toys. Because
Right.
you don't know what they're into, what kind of person they are.
Keep away from the door.
So, you know, I think that even though there's a crass side to the merchandising of it, in a world where, you know, people just, you know, are in an empty apartment staring at a screen, you know, those things that they have, like their T-shirts and their toys, really are important, become more and more important because they're physical things that they can use to be a part of their lives.
I think you've hit the next nail on the head, the physical screen post-COVID. I mean, that's the reason that all these things exist virtually now. Let's address that a bit, Brett.
Creating digital assets, which are, again, part of a world connected to a certain curated IP. It all comes out of the creative vision of that world and how it's built. You know, that's going to be a full virtual economy. Obviously, that's happened in gaming in a way that is much larger than most people understand.
Right.
It's a multi-billion-dollar business. You know, and so connecting that with narrative content, with also interactive narrative content, and being able to really, I've always called it story world for about 25 years. Calling this a story world, and that term has been, you know, utilized at some point. And I think that there's a way of doing this which is well beyond what we've seen already, and also connects, especially in the context of blockchain and a tokenized world, a way of codifying and valuing activity and attention. You know, basic attention tokens. And then the bigger issue that we're talking about here is that fans are no longer going to be just fans disconnected from the creative process. I very much believe that the creative process is going to become more and more democratized, and more there's going to be feedback with the group mind, with the world. And, you know, if you start looking at AI machine learning procedural technologies and how they can start to create aspects. Obviously, there's been a lot of things happening in gaming along those lines, but, you know, to create that in the context of interactive narrative, of character, of emotion, these are the things that really we're all blending together into one media experience, as opposed to, you know, those of us in Hollywood, we're the monks on the mountaintop who know calligraphy, and we send the calligraphy down to the masses. That's going away, thank God. I think the era
that's Silicon Valley and going away, thank God.
Exactly. And so, but the democratization, you know, which is, we really need to talk about that, because what Facebook is doing, what, you know, some of the other, you know, aspects of FANG are doing, it's just, there's a lot of things here that we need to be very aware of as this medium emerges, especially the social interactive aspect. And that social interactive aspect, the rubber meets the road at that edge of fandom, as you know, Steve. I mean, that's, you know, that's where it's being, you know, the fodder is being created. That's where we're finding out what the turbulence is. And we need to create democratized rituals around this, which empower everyone to be creators themselves and to blend into the world of other creators that may, you know, look, I make movies that have seen by 1 billion people, that, you know, gives me a certain, you know, aspect of being able to say something out there, but that needs to be able to, we need to activate the genius of the group mind in the context of the creative process. And that's the great hope of this medium for me.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, you brought up Dungeons and Dragons earlier. I mean, you know, in a sense, that was all about, you know, group community, tribal community with, you know, with one, a dungeon keeper, a dungeon teller, storyteller, and then a group of fans and players. And, you know, I used the term viewer 25 years ago for a viewer user to describe what the game industry was creating, where film and game were merging. And
I don't think I coined it. Someone told me I did at one point, but I started calling it a viewer user player. So I probably learned it from you. No. But,
there's a lot of antecedents to all this stuff.
And yeah, it's you know, it's a very interesting subject matter, and I think probably the most sort of ideal case study we have that really is something like Dungeons and Dragons that's been now in existence for 40 years and has become so robust as a system that people use, fans use, I should say, to create their own stories with their friends.
Correct.
Wizards of the Coast doesn't own in any way. They don't own those characters. They don't own those places. So what for me would become interesting, or when it becomes interesting, is when I try to bring games to life in parks and things. So
Right.
make a stage for the fans to live out their dreams as their favorite characters. So the real question for me comes to play: how much do you allow or enable, should I say, them to become essential figures in your fiction? And where does that ownership start and stop?
Right.
And that's, we can see it with YouTube creators, on the other side of it, or, all of us on Twitter or wherever else it is. And we're constantly generating all of this content with the hopes of maybe, whether stringing, hooking something that goes viral or getting a new gig or maybe a of interest. But we're sort of hoping to hook something from it, but the exact returns from it aren't very clear. So it seems to me that's where this space gets sort of interesting. If I'm a fan that's really invested, what's my return for creating this space?
Well, that's where
there needs to be a basic attention token and a tokenized value that can grow within a world based upon the amount of people that are going to be interacting with it. And that starts to create this idea of universal basic income connected to creative activity. I mean,
agreed.
That's where we need to go. It's a combination of what Andrew Yang was talking about and the activation and empowerment of the creative genius of everyone and of the hive mind. And, this is the only way we're going to solve the problems we're looking at, fellas. As a matter of fact, this virtual nation we're in right now is the only nation that's actually building right now as opposed to being deconstructed. Everything else is deconstructing around us, you may have noticed.
That's a fair way to put it.
And
that's one way of saying it.
That is the story that's going on right now in the overall group narrative. But the story we can tell of the global human in virtual space, in creating our own virtual world, our own virtual nation, there's something there that's a clean slate. And it excites me as a storyteller and as a human being to a great degree. And that's why I'm so enthusiastic and also cautious about this medium. The irony for me is that I've told primarily cautionary tales and popularized it through cautionary tales. That aspect of it is now, I believe, we need to move into utopian storytelling. We need to move into showing the better angels of our nature being activated by these technologies.
Yeah. I think we missed that, Brett. I actually rewatched Lawnmower Man earlier today just to kind of remind myself of what it meant to me all those years ago. And I saw it probably when I was 14, and that whole dystopian part went clear over my head. Me and my friends were like, "Yes, nootropics. Let's get on the VR."
Exactly.
Well, that's
what, guys?
Do VR, right?
You know what?
Lobo?
You know what, guys? Every single movie that is supposed to be a cautionary tale never works like that.
No, they become a business plan.
Like Saturday Night Fever. At the end of that movie, he takes off the white suit and goes back to school.
Yeah,
right.
But everybody
else fucking.
But they all forget that.
The fucking disco.
Well, right. I post usually about, everybody needs to read The Machine Stops from 1909 by Ian Foster. I mean, the problem we have with virtual reality and the bubbles today, and again, dystopias, is that, as you're saying, is that there's a generation that reads them as a business plan, as an opportunity for venture capital. But that wasn't the point of the original story, of the original narrative. Snow Crash is another good example.
The hope that's happening, and look, all this stuff around social media, maybe some of you have seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma, and Netflix is just very good at explicating a very dystopian reality that's going on with social media, with Google, with Facebook, etc. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's worth watching. For those of you that don't already know that that's what's going on, there's a lot of us probably here that do. But, but it does express it for the masses in a very good way. And look, but the hope is the fact that I think all of these siloed social media elements that have been in this first wave of this aspect of social interaction with digital content and digital platforms is just the birth cry. We're just in the barely out of the birth canal. and it's forming into a more integrated world build that I believe with blockchain, with things like, spatial computing, the kinds of things that companies like Versus is doing. There's a lot of things that can really disrupt what has been the development to this point and everything that everyone's worried about. But we do need to embed into this the creative empowerment and also data sovereignty and control of your digital identity. I mean, that stuff has to be at the center of what we're talking about, or we're going to go in the wrong direction. I mean, there's going to be, we need to see this new medium as something which is the possibility of the clean slate to create an entire new metric around social interaction with media, quote unquote, but social,
Right.
and the way it has been, done with the absolutely diabolical business models of, companies like Google and Facebook. We can't let that diabolical business model move into the virtual experience completely. That's why WebXR and the democratization of this is so important.
Well,
Yeah.
I think part of the issue is those were scale, businesses of scale, and I think one of the issues is that we need to look at more of, again, human scale, not just of our lives, but of also our media circles.
Exactly.
And again, if there's an equity, again, figured into the model, like I was saying, I mean, again, Dungeons and Dragons, there was an implicit equity when people would get around the table together. There's a complicit, equity when people come to see Mr. Lobo hosting a show at a movie theater, like a Blobfest, let's say. I mean, they know what they're doing about being entertained, but now we have a whole new world with YouTube, and again, where I think we all know the so-called toxic fan syndrome. I think that's mostly been driven by, a misconnect between the product, the corporation, and the creator and the fan, in terms of trying to define those relationships. And,
there's an overarching capitalistic sociopathy which is going on as well, embedded in people like Mark Zuckerberg. Look in his eyes, everybody. I'm sorry. There's nothing there. He's the termite queen, for God's sake. Anyway, and we need to realize that those imperatives, those aspects of capitalistic imperative, need to be disrupted as we move into the virtual world. And I'm not talking about socialism or Marxism. I'm not talking about any specific. Although go back and read Marx and Engels right now; it's pretty fucking interesting. But we cannot take out of our job as creators in this new medium an understanding of the stakes and the socio-economic reality of what's going on.
Absolutely. I mean, for years we would call this the nuclear of mediums. I mean, in television, is a howitzer. The internet, was a B-1 bomber, but XR is on its way to being a neutron bomb.
Exactly.
And we are the pioneers in this, and this is a pioneering event that Cubex is putting on here in Mediaverse, and doing it live and then putting it out to another audience. And the next one we do, we'll stream it to Twitch live as well. And then again, we're only there are other platforms out there, but again, that require corporate oversight. This one doesn't, and it allowed us to basically, we'll also be able to get hundreds of people in these rooms in just a matter of months. As I said, the need for this from a bottom up as much as a top down has become apparent in the last 8 months.
It needs to be bottom up. That's why I'm such a fan of WebXR and have been for so long. I mean, it's like it is the open source foundation for democratization of virtual experience. And look, it's getting easy. I mean, I try to do it like I'm the dumbest person on the planet. I just open my computer, click on the link, and see what happens. I don't have any. I try not to insert any special technical knowledge or putting on an HMD. All of that stuff doesn't need to happen with this. And yet, feel what we're all feeling here, guys. We feel a virtual presence with each other.
That's right.
We're in a space with each other.
There's a magic circle here, no doubt.
Yeah, and that aspect is so huge that's deliverable with the link on a new modality, a new metaphor for the web. This is the next web, and it is really,
That's right.
and it's that aspect of it cannot be overstated. And I think it's been missed by a lot of people. It's like, hey, this is so much better than a Zoom call,
Well, I like how easy it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Miss Pac-Man, right? Anybody can just jump on.
Exactly.
And I think that's the kind of the way it has to be, or for it to really get where it needs to go. I mean, the first video games that came out with 10 pages of instructions that you had to read before you could get started. I feel like this is really, the fact that we were able to, this afternoon send out a link to 17 people and have them all show up and be present, and we can all hear each other, and you and I could get in a corner and talk to each other in a room of 30 people, and we're hearing ourselves louder and closer than those other people who are in the background also having their individual conversation.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, we all felt it too. We were sitting here getting set up, trying to figure out our avatars, making sure we got everyone in the door. It had a certain live aspect to it that felt very real.
It did, and it felt like, like I said, it feels like we're getting ready to shoot a award show. Everyone was like talking to each other, and it was like, the general chaos, and these cameras were floating around. I'm like going, this feels familiar.
Yeah, I did feel like we were in a TV studio getting ready to shoot a live feed.
Exactly.
And we haven't said the S word. I think that's a big part of it, the spatial part of it. Zoom is just so bloody flat, and there's no reason to live in that world anymore. So something about having space together. Admittedly, I've been sort of skeptical myself recently. You see the WebXR stuff? And people like, the Burning Man VR stuff, like people going to raves together. I see what people are doing, and I think, I just don't get that. I mean, I need to do that.
Look, I was talking with the Burning Man people with my partner Josh Orr, and we were trying to tell them, look, and I know the way they went is just, look, it's what's wrong with the whole virtual industry in general right now, and there's a need to bring projects that really break out, that are hits, that show what this is. So I'm very strongly working on that.
Right.
I mean, it's like, without something that really handholds people and gets them to see what this truly is, something we know palpably because we're experiencing it, you have to break through that context barrier, and the context has not been set yet.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I think we're doing this. I mean, I was at all the Burning Man. And it's 15 years of Burning Man's in VR, Second Life, and other places as well. It's about context of what you're attempting to do. I mean, I've always thought XR VR is more about being the telephone than the television for a lot of things as well. So it's not a dance party with robotic avatars. Again, is one thing, but what we're doing here is the circle. Did you say that? And the tribal nature of getting together and talking about things. And
I saw a great article I read. I want to say it was in the journal recently. That basically what we're talking about is an evolution of telephone.
That's right. It's that spatial holographic transporter, that'll put you in the room with the other person. And again, it's not about performing for the other person or dancing or having hollow sex or whatever. Maybe for certain people. But just for the pure ability, I mean, and this is what people exactly. People are learning now. I mean, again, the difference between what we're doing in a Zoom call is that you're not on stage in the sense for all 30 people at the same time, because you can look around, and as an individual in the world, other people are looking around, so they're not always watching you. So a guy could sneak behind the stage who did before, because we wouldn't, if that person had gotten up to go to the bathroom in a Zoom call, all 30 people would have seen it at the same time.
I shouldn't say this because I should just do it, but I keep getting tempted to go get my 10-year-old, and I'll put him in the chair and have him start talking. And when like another soul takes over my avatar here, I mean, that's an interesting boundaries to cross, right?
Absolutely.
Look, there's fascinating new ways of expressing interactive, engaging human intimacy in these modalities. It's new. And there's so many, frontiers to explore in that. that that's obviously I've tried to tell some stories about that before, but there's so many that are just now appearing on the horizon, and that's what's so exciting. This is an extension in a transhuman sense of human consciousness, and and that's a big fucking deal, man. It's like this thing is not like I published my 5 laws of VR like almost 6 years ago, and it was an homage to Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, and but with a tongue in cheek more so than anything. But I say that the first law of VR is the stakes are high with this medium. It's not like another medium where the stakes are high with cinema, with television, with radio, all those things. But this is even more because it literally changes neuronic pathways, like reality does. So we need to be very conscious of the conscious responsibility as creators while we're doing this in this medium.
No, I've become very conscious of it lately myself, trying to limit my intake and be much more controlled about the platforms that I'm using, because as you said, they do really alter your brain in ways that we even fully understand quite yet. And we're dealing, say, with a platform like Facebook, which obviously is intended to do certain things and have users feel certain ways. It's not necessarily the most healthy thing. So it's
it creates it creates solipsism.
Yeah, very much so.
But weirdly enough, in this kind of environment with WebXR, I don't feel that. And that's something, there's an energy that's coming through the democratization of this and its basic form and how it's going to, I think is really possible.
Yeah, I mean, I like that I'm not looking at my face. I think that's a big part of it. I get really tired of seeing my face all the time when I'm on social. It's like looking in this mirror, and it's not a good mirror because probably haven't updated your profile picture. And
it's the whole Uber narcissism engine of Instagram and all. I mean, it's created another level of narcissistic personality disorder that an entire generation has.
Media-induced psychosis syndrome. But the point I'll get to on that is that what I like about this medium is that it's given us, every new medium gives us a chance to examine the old medium. I mean, and right now this medium is a new medium where the internet and what went on in the internet and social media, the way Facebook did it in MySpace, is the old medium. And I think a lot of us would suggest that it didn't go very well the last 10 years in that medium. But right now, obviously there are players.
Hopefully we can be nicer here.
That would be nice. And that's one of the things, again, that this spatial gives you, is the ability to maybe try to be a bit nicer. I mean, again, the history isn't that clear about, I mean, most of our griefing culture, trolling culture, a lot of that came out of Second Life. You could write books about it. But we'll get, that's another panel. We're doing another panel about ethics and economy here at the VR Global, which will be a Zoom panel with actually one of the creators of Hubs, Mozilla, and their last ethicist before the shakeup at Mozilla and Hubs. So they have a lot to say about this. And I've also invited.
Send me a link for that, man.
You're not joking, are you?
No. It's going to be a live panel at the conference. I think it's a couple of hours before this one. It's almost time to wrap up this part of the show and maybe do some questions from the audience.
Yeah.
So
one of the things I want to say is because we're doing this in virtual space, the fact that we are adhering to a metaphor of us up on stage, separate from the fans. I mean, we're talking about this being who owns the metaverse and the new era of fandom. I mean, we need to be able to mix in new ways that are not of this old metaphor. It's funny that we gravitate. That
is the title of the other panel. That is the other panel. There was a mix up in the emails. Whose metaverse is it anyway? And here we are trying to build a more fun Mediaverse.
When you talk about fandom, it's like right now this idea of we're on stage and there's people watching. I mean, I understand why for this, but it's like we need to start creating new metaphors and new rituals for virtual experience and how to interact in a space like this. That doesn't, it doesn't have to be these physical components that were there for very good reason in other venues that were actually physical, but now we're in virtual, we can be much more imaginative.
I agree. I mean, this was set up primarily to be a bit of a television talk show host set, but this space now this Mediaverse space is really the beginning now, the Mediaverse Lounge, of doing hopefully weekly, first bi-weekly interviews, bringing interesting people together, just like we would do in real life.
Ritual is a really great word. I'm going to jump on that really quick.
Yeah.
I focus on designing rituals myself a lot in my work these days, especially to get, I think it was Warren Spector, actually, a talk I heard him give years ago at the Game Developers Conference. And he talked about story being this way to lower the barrier to entry. And I thought that was really brilliant. So I see ritual in the same way. And
Absolutely.
you can sort of create new rituals, but as you were talking about earlier, we had the radio, we had the TV, we had the personal computer, but now it's suddenly in everyone's hands before we know it's going to be on our faces. And we don't have rituals that sort of back up how we go about that experience. It's not the gathering around fire.
Right. Well, the funny thing is that there are elements of this that do relate to ancient tribal rituals. I was in the middle of an ancient ritual with Aboriginal people in Australia, where I lived for 5 years. And it was called corroboree. And I was in the middle of it and realized I was in the most virtual multimedia experience of my life with no technology. And the structures of that ritual and that celebration fit very. So one of the things I'm working on is creating onboarding rituals that have antecedents to ancient tribal rituals that are really apropos to virtual space. It's a really fascinating area, and there's a lot of anthropologic research and corpus of knowledge in that area to pull from that really will help us in virtual space.
Yeah. So this is great. I mean, this has been wonderful. I think we've really we've beaten up the beginning of the subject here. That's going to go on for a long time.
Questions? I'm going to take some questions.
Let's see if we can do that. Is there anyone? Let's turn to the audience. Was there anyone who wanted to have a question? Maybe they can type in the question if they'd like to start.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you. Yes, Chris.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I really agree with everything that you're saying. I think one of the things that you used as a example was Dungeons and Dragons and being able to just sit with your friends and build that world by yourself. And I think one of the things that's going to have to come into this is just the accessibility to the people. I mean, that's one of the things that's missing right now. Like, if I had a concept for something to extend Lawnmower Man, I can't come to you with that. And
it's very challenging, Chris. So, myself, I come from the other side. We're all wizards up here to some extent, but now this idea that I also have to build a community for my property, that's a totally different job. It's a very different aspect, I think, to creation. So I think what you're saying is a valid point, and it sort of comes to the democratization of this stuff.
Let me talk a little bit about Lawnmower Man. I have been working on Lawnmower Man Reborn as an IP, as a property for a while, and it is going to absolutely include and embed the group crowdsourcing of narrative right from the beginning. I'm building it as a world, and then the narrative elements, like a feature film, will fall out of the world, not the other way around. And so there's ways of actually codifying group activity with procedural technologies. Like there's very interesting groups like Improbable. Are you guys familiar with Improbable? That technology, it's being used in the gaming industry to a certain degree. But there's going to be ways of absorbing the group mind process and the group creation and creative, and then have that totally be embedded within the experience of the world, and then even within the experience of more static narrative storytelling of that IP. So it's very exciting to kind of flip the script on that, Agreed.
Was there another question for Mr. Lobo?
Yeah, we had a question from Gio about how he got started and a little bit about his history getting to where he is.
I think I think a lot of times when you write stories and draw pictures and make content, especially in the pre computer world, people can't always follow all of the things that you do. And I think that it became very it became very clear, especially when you try to get something published or you try to get someone to look at what you're doing, that if they don't connect to you, they won't connect to your content. So it definitely seemed like I needed to have a persona. I needed to have a way of allowing people to connect the dots and go, oh, all of these things come from Mr. Lobo, and that definitely has helped me in that degree. Of course, the format of it is purely from growing up and watching people like Rod Serling or Bob Wilkins on Creature Features, where you have the character of the narrator, the spectral narrator, the storyteller, and I always just loved that kind of guy. You can't imagine that guy mowing their lawn or taking their kids to soccer practice. You only imagine them, sitting in a rocking chair in outer space, spinning you a story, and I just like that kind of guy. So that's just sort of that's who Mr. Lobo is, and that is the reason that I kind of have this persona and why I love the horror host.
So we've got another question here from Josh Tapley.
Hi, my question was really around the artists, and how do we see the artists being able to sort of profit enough to be successful? Not that they're giving away their time and their talent by creating models that are just used for free, or donating their time in these VR environments. Like, how can they be successful without the corporations or larger corporations coming in and sort of taking over?
My comment is, that was kind of the light bulb that went over my head 25 years ago with Starbase, and I put out a license. Now that license has kind of been adopted and kind of perverted, in my opinion, by Creative Commons. 2 C's, not 3. They kind of left out the fact that people got to get paid. Artists, creatives got to get paid. They say basically just want you to, give your work away to put it out there, which basically creates clicks for Google or for somebody who's, owns the wires or the tubes. The whole point was that we needed a system, basically, an agreement between the fans and between the property owners that allowed certain non-commercial usage, and certain commercial usage, and of the IPs. I was doing something where you could build your own spaceship using the parts, and then take 10% reselling it. Name it. It's yours to resell within the confines of the site. Now, of course, the game world has already, over 25 years, has adopted a lot of that and kept it within closed systems, which actually works out fine. But it's got to be equitable.
No, but
they've experimented doing it in other ways. The D20 system, what Wizards of the Coast is now doing with D&D 5e 5th edition. They're trying to open it up. So there's a sort of dissonance happening between sort of the property and the creators and the owners, where how much of this stuff is user generated versus how much of it is trickled down from Wizards of the Coast.
Right. I worked with them on D&D 2 Pool of Radiance digital game 20 years ago, and that's when I was working with them, and I was telling them these ideas. I was trying to communicate this to that world at WotC. So, it's taken that long. In some ways, to come around to this next generation. It's refreshing in some ways that the second handbook rules, now the 5th handbook rules, are finally beginning to address these issues.
But I think that there's going to be an entirely new metaphor, entirely new structure and infrastructure that is going to involve blockchain and crypto concepts, crypto value concepts that are going to be, automated within a virtual world and the creation of it. That's what we're working on for all the stuff we're doing in Studio Lightship, so that there's actually a vibrant virtual economy
Right.
going on within a world that is organic to that.
And what
world.
would you look for as a case study of that? I mean, the Bitcoin, is that sort of what we're talking about? Is also creating our own sort of virtual currency of content?
It goes to the philosophical underpinnings, the idea of value itself. Okay,
Right.
How to create value. Enough people interacting within a world creates an overall value. That's what basic attention token is about. There are cryptocurrency philosophies and foundations here that are still developing, but they can be applied in a creative world like this.
One of the things, Brett, is that the tech industry looks at those as binary absolutes of technology and feigns against regulation of some sort. But regulation is trust, and that's how economies truly work. So that there needs to be a trust beyond the code is non-breakable, because that's bullshit, and we all know that. And that's why, as I was saying, Second Life took from Starbase C3 and created the Linden Dollar and the ability to create that economy in their world from what we were doing at the SF Web 3D group. Again, 20 years ago now. But there was an agreement and a trust of the protection. People don't like digital rights management, but it's an idea of trusting and understanding that there's also adjudication going on.
What we're doing is working with, again, companies like Versus, which have a trustless network, which and algorithmic foundation for spatial computing writ large, and spatial computing is the overall meta trend that's all of what we're talking about is floating. And there's going to be whole new functionality that are capable. And so, all of those experiments have been valuable, but they were never able to go there to a ubiquitous level because it just wasn't the time technologically. It's, we've all been experiencing all these ideas being ahead of their time for quite a number of decades now. And so now there is a moment happening, and even because of things like COVID and that inflection point that I believe is going to create an amalgam that allows a different level of virtual economy to be created. And that's
I agree. I mean, and I think again, this is why why I chose the two panels, I guess, to put on for the conference. One which is about economy and ethics and in terms of society, and of course, I mean, Brett, again, we always talk about this in all our panels. It comes back to the creative element. I mean, again, and the content and the fan, because again, the fan was always looked at as kind of the fan became the product in the Facebook model. We all became the product in that model, and the equity isn't there, and we see that now in 2020. We're killing ourselves over it. Did you want to say something, Lobo, about it?
On the subject of monetization, on OSI 74, which is my streaming channel, we've got dozens of producers. There's 900 pieces of content on the channel. The only thing that we offer them is access to the system. We're using their content, but we're also allowing them to advertise their Patreon or their products and the things that they have to offer. And so, on our side of things, even though we're crowdsourcing a whole TV network, everyone has access to advertise the things that they sell. And I think that's where it's been balancing out for us, is to just allowing the people who are giving us the content access to the same system that we all have. It's basically almost the public access model.
Great, amazing, exactly. That's why I wanted you on this panel. One of the reasons. Well, that's our show for tonight, folks. I want to thank you all for coming. Let's thank our guests. Let's thank our studio audience of live avatars, and especially the audience watching in from the VR AR Global Summit. WebXR will be producing more of these Mediaverse Lounge events in the weeks and months to come. So look for us on your internet dial. Good night, folks.